And it suddenly occurred to me that if I had $100,000, let's say, of money to invest in anything, I could invest that in the share market. And, let's say if the market grew by 10% over the year, I'd walk away with 110 grand. And then that would compound each year, that it would continue to grow, and et cetera, et cetera.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share conversations I've enjoyed with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how on where they invest their time, their skills, and their money, and the benefits this has created. Get Invested helps you to live more, work less, and leave a legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover top tips on how to get started, to make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living the dream. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at khgroup.com.au/Get Invested. Thanks for listening, and let's get invested. Welcome back, freedom fighters. Today I want to start again with a quick question to get you thinking. How often do you ask yourself, can we really have it all? Can we, on the one hand, make a mark in the world and leave a legacy, and at the same time, enjoy a simple life of contentment? Because often those two seem to clash. On the one hand, we've got the ambition to make a difference in the world and to have a high impact, which generally comes with high pressure, stress, and a relentless pace. But this contrasts with our need for peace and serenity, and the need to get away from it all. It's the classic battle of the head and the heart. And it is this dichotomy that has plagued today's guest for many years, and it's a subject that we dive into in some detail in our discussion today. And it's interesting that it tends to play out in his personality. And I'm talking about Mike Reid, because Mike Reid is an enigma. When you first meet Mike, he's a very likeable, quiet guy, and he feels like a mix of Clark Kent meeting Simon Baker from The Mentalist. He's, on one hand, a very mild-mannered gentleman, but he's also an extremely high achiever. So beneath his quiet exterior hides great insight and a very driven passion. You see, Mike is the co-founder of Dent Global, who are a training advisory company that runs the world's best business accelerator, the Key Person of Influence program. And it's where I was lucky enough to meet Mike and the rest of the Dent Global team. On an individual basis, Mike's an investor, he's a business growth hacker, and he's a real rainmaker. So in our really good discussion today, we talk about his investment journey in both business and property. And we talk about his love of Burning Man. And if some of you haven't heard of Burning Man, you're really going to love that discussion. But we also talk about a lot of other really deep insights. So, look, I've got a lot of time for Mike Reid, so please grab yourself a coffee and enjoy this great conversation. Well, I'm really excited today to be having a discussion with the infamous Mike Reid. He's a great mate of mine. For those who don't know, he's the global director of Dent Global, who are famous for the Key Person of Influence program. He described himself as the perfect mix of Simon Baker, Hugh Jackson, and Clark Kent. So the mind boggles there, Mike. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Bushy. And I don't know if anyone else agrees with that description, but it's my if there could be a love child between Simon Baker, Hugh Jackman, and Clark Kent, then I aspire to be that love child.
Well, I think you've got all the ladies' interests right there, mate. And probably many more as well, mate. So I can just see you in the suit, man. So
it makes for a good description on Tinder. Let's say that much.
Fantastic, mate. Now, look, for those who don't know you and haven't had the pleasure of spending time with you, Mike, can you start by telling us who you are, what you do, and where you're heading currently?
Yeah. So, look. Who I am is a guy called Mike Reid. What I do is I co-run a training and advisory company called Dent Global, and with my business partners Glenn Carlson and Daniel Priestley, we've built this organisation into a well-renowned organisation helping entrepreneurs to stand out and scale up their businesses. We usually work with small service-based business owners, people who are good at what they do, lots of industry experience, great technicians in their field, whatever that may be, whether it's accountants or lawyers or trainers or coaches or professional services, health services, all those kind of things. But what they struggle with is working out how to best position themselves, their brand, really differentiate, stand out from the competition. And so we put them through a 12-month accelerator environment where we connect them with a faculty of amazing mentors, and there's online learning and accountability and structure and access to suppliers and resources, and essentially help accelerate them through that process and help them stand out as key people of influence in their industry.
Yeah, Brian, well.
And I've been doing that for the last 7 years here in Australia, and that's kind of where I've come from. I always came from a background of wanting to be an entrepreneur and run my own business and all that kind of jazz, which I know I sort of cringe a little bit when I say that word today because it's a very popular word and gets thrown around a lot. But I always had this love for business and entrepreneurship. I kind of love the idea of being in business where business was kind of like this vehicle where you had the opportunity for exponential growth.
Yes.
I kind of saw the career and the traditional pathways in life as being this sort of very linear way to go through life, and linear never really suited me. I kind of love the idea of how could I leapfrog the competition, and I sort of very, very quietly in the background always was pretty competitive and wanted to go out and win in life. And I guess, the way I saw winning was, through business, and for some reason, wealth accumulation was always exciting for me. Not because I'm a really materialistic person, or I'm a pretty modest kind of dude and have modest desires and all those kind of things. But I did love the concept of wealth being this sort of vehicle for freedom and for choice, and ultimately freedom and choice are very high in my values. The things I value are things like health and wealth and love and business and adventure. And so, I always saw wealth as a way to be able to support those values that, I held dear. So that's a little bit of my journey. And look, where I'm off to next is, in many ways, an open book, a bit of a blank canvas. At the moment, I've been running our business here in Australia for the last 7 years, but I'm actually planning on heading overseas in the next 12 or so months to go and set up an office for what we do in Vancouver, Canada.
Nice.
But in the meantime, I'm going to take a bit of time to do a bit of travel and explore new opportunities and launch a podcast of my own and finish a book that I've been writing and a few other bits and bobs too. So I feel like it's a nice time in my life where there's a combination of a plan and a bit of a blank canvas as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting exercise, mate, because there's some big rocks you've got in there and plenty of scope and plenty of opportunity. So tell me, and I'll dig into some of what you've said in a minute, but why do you do what you do, Mike?
Good question. Good question, Bushy. But I do what I do because I believe at the heart of my nature and who I am as a person is someone who really enjoys being around people and particularly around people who are entrepreneurial, who kind of see the world through a bit of a different lens or have great ambitions or aspirations and those kind of things. Yep. And I love to teach, and I love to, I love to see them grow as much as I would like to grow. I think at the heart of what drives me is growth. I love the concept of growth. I really enjoy growing as an individual, and I love to see the people we work with grow. That really juices me, really excites me. And so I think if I can, in some small way, help our clients to grow their business, and that has a great impact in their lives, and that's awesome. But I guess collectively, if we as an organization can be helping entrepreneurs all over the world to grow and to have an impact in their own industries and in their own lives, that does great things for their family, for their communities, and ultimately, we're making a little bit of a dent in the universe ourselves. And
absolutely.
While the business is challenging and it's ups and downs, and there's plenty of times of pulling your hair out or losing your hair in my case, and
you still got some, mate,
dealing with the just the struggles of being a business. If I come back to kind of why I do what I do, despite whatever we achieve as a business, that's just something that I'm really proud to do in the world, is to have had the impact that we've had on the lives of our clients.
Absolutely. Well, I can say and reinforce firsthand my experience with Dent and the Key Person of Influence program has been life-changing. So, and we're having you were the person who introduced me into the fold. That journey is still continuing, and the fundamentals that you've helped to open our eyes to has taken our business far beyond expectation in a very short space of time. And my enjoyment of life and business in general is tenfold what it was, because of your ability to really help us crystallise a vision and then make that happen. And it's a great formula that you've codified, Mike, and anyone who's serious about changing their life and making an impact and doing it in a way that's going to have some presence and lift your profile to position yourself as an authority in your space. I could not recommend any higher the KPI program through Dent. So, mate, and that's the reason why I'm talking to you today. I've got immense respect for you as a person and as a entrepreneur, and hence the reason why I'm wanting to share your views and your story with those that I think can learn a lot from the journey you've had so far. Now, mate,
that's kind. Thank you.
No, heartfelt. And I just want to dig into something though that you mentioned early on, and because it's very rare, Mike, when you said that from as long as I can remember, I had an interest in wealth creation. Now, very, very few people ever get that aspiration. Most people that I've come across focus on their work or their skills or their career. And it's all about income, but very few have the foresight to look at wealth creation in parallel with that. Can you talk to us a little bit about when that occurred, why that occurred, and where that's taken you on that journey today?
It's really funny you say that, because from my perspective, I feel like it's always been there in some form or another. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint particular times, and yet I sort of ask myself, why is that there? I'm not quite sure either. It's a funny thing. I guess I'm reflecting on as I'm talking now. But the thing I find most interesting for me as well is that I came from a family background where very, very fortunate family circumstances, where my grandfather ran a successful business. He ran a water meter business back in his day called Davy Shepherd, which sold to a company called Brown Boveri, which is an international, I think they're a conglomerate type thing.
Yes.
And so, I was in a family where there was money around, there was wealth, there's these kind of things. And, typically in that kind of scenario, you find that the kids and the grandkids and all that kind of thing tend to be spoiled little brats, or they're entitled or whatever it may be. And my cousins on my mum's side of the family were probably a little bit more that way. For whatever reason, I was always this pretty diligent, studious, disciplined kind of kid. Nothing ever came easy to me at school. It was I wasn't one of those kids that was really talented and didn't need to study for exams. I had to really study and learn everything to be able to get good results. And I got good results because of that disciplined effort and execution.
Yep.
And so for whatever reason, I think in my DNA, I was just kind of like this guy who really enjoyed work, or developed this habit of recognizing that any success I achieved in life came through hard work. And probably now I think about it more deeply, I think that desire to want to achieve and do well at school probably came from feeling a lack of significance and a lack of recognition from my father. And often this happens in people's lives, especially young boys' lives or men's lives, where they're seeking the recognition and the validation from their parents and particularly their father. But I never quite felt like I was probably intelligent enough or smart enough or whatever it may be for my dad, which is if I asked my dad that, or if I said that would probably he wouldn't that was a hang up that I had as a kid or whatever it may be. And so I felt like I always had this something to prove, and I think that really instilled this work ethic in me.
Was your father a hard worker? Was he
dad's side as well? When my parents divorced, he remarried, and my stepmom came from a upbringing where they didn't have a lot of money around. She came from more difficult circumstances. And she, I think, always instilled these ideas around like career and ways to make money, and that was kind of a little bit part of the culture of my dad's side of the family. And so whether it's a combination of that and a combination of not being a kid who innately was super intelligent or talented, had to achieve things through hard work, I had this ethic around hard work and results came through hard work, and I think that helped inform my discipline towards wealth accumulation, and then perhaps partly influenced by my stepmom, unbeknownst to her, I'm sure, that I got interested in making money. And and look, also I think this has been amplified as time's gone on, where when my grandfather died, my uncle, mum's brother, ended up embezzling a bunch of inheritance from my mother, and that led to all sorts of family dramas, and often as it goes in families with money, there's all sorts of upheaval when it comes to people dying and all that kind of thing, and so Mum spent a lot of time in court trying to recover funds and yada yada, and so I think ever since those things occurred, I became very interested in things like how could I rebuild the family fortune, and recognize that as quickly as it's there, it can be taken away. So how do I build a infrastructure that is really protected and can continue to grow, and also support my future generation. So I don't know. I think there's a mixture of life experiences and a mixture of philosophies in there that just for whatever reason got me really interested in building wealth. And I think also my very competitive nature, liked the idea of going out and creating that and kind of beating the rest of the world, rightly or wrongly.
No, brilliant.
And then look, also, a big part of me just wants to lead a life of fun and adventure. And so, I love to work, but I love freedom, and wealth always just seems so linked to having freedom and choice in life.
Yes. Yeah. No, very good call, mate. A couple of questions just digging in there as well, man. At sort of what age were when your father and mother split up? What sort of age were you at that time?
I was 10 at that time.
Okay. So, and was your father a very hard-working person himself?
Look, he was, yeah. My dad's and my mum are probably polar opposite in terms of personalities, and Dad worked as a tax accountant for many years in the city in Melbourne where I grew up, and
Yeah.
He was a hard worker, but he worked a corporate job essentially. He wasn't very entrepreneurial and so fairly straight laced, very academically intelligent guy,
Right.
emotionally intelligent. Probably not as much his strength, but very very intelligent from a numbers and a logic perspective and all those kind of things.
Right.
And so that profession really suited him. And then Mum was kind of professional mum for most of her life, and so she was she was a bit stronger on the kind of social front and those kind of things. So I think I hopefully got a blend of those two personalities and came out to be a nice even balance of both.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd certainly say exactly that. And it's really interesting, and the reason I say that is my own background, while quite a few decades earlier, was of a similar ilk, and I was absolutely blessed with Mum and Dad. They were fantastic, and while I went through a similar exercise of I think just trying to get Dad to say, hey, Dad, look at me. I'm here. Look at me, because my father would work extremely hard, and that was probably. I'm very much like you, mate. Things didn't come naturally to me, so my way of excelling was just to work harder than everyone else, and that becomes ingrained in the way you treat everything in life generally, and that ends up becoming quite competitive because if it sounds like you're very similar. Once you've established that measuring stick for yourself, then you've got to live up to it, and that can become its own trap. As I found out in my mid-30s, that I just couldn't live up to my own image eventually, and that started my change in direction away from career into building wealth in a much more serious way, because I found that as you've said, that freedom comes from having time on your hands, and you only get time on your hands when your income needs are being met through means that aren't reliant on you generating it. So very interesting, mate. Very interesting indeed, actually. Well, let's talk about that then. So age of 10, that happened fairly early, taking everything from your environment, this view of, okay, well, wealth creation is a means of helping me to help myself and others and preserve the family. When did you, what was your first investment then?
So my first real investment was at the age of 19. I bought a apartment which I ended up living in for a number of years in St Kilda in Melbourne.
Okay.
And I was fortunate at the time where I had a little bit of cash in the account from when my grandfather died, that passed to me, which enabled me to get that foothold on the ladder, which
awesome.
is just so hard in hindsight, especially now I'm further along in life and further along in career and investing and that sort of stuff. Just recognizing how hard it is for a lot of people to be able to get that first initial foot on the property ladder or investment ladder, yes. Because as you know, Bushy, as time goes on, as you let the value of compound interest take effect, then really wealth accumulation becomes a staged game in terms of just waiting for time to lead to appreciation, and then using the equity in that appreciation to buy further investments, and that compounds over time, and some of the big gains in terms of wealth accumulation happens in those sort of final 20 or 30, 20, 10, 5 years of someone's life.
True.
But anyway, true. So I had that, and then I bought that apartment, and that was my first investment.
Yeah, okay. And what were you doing at the time? You just finished probably at uni, or
about to start a commerce degree at Melbourne Uni.
Okay.
And so I don't think my neighbours were too happy that some 19-year-old was living in the apartment block and liked to throw the odd party or two in his uni days.
Hey, what attracted you into commerce, mate? So you got through high school, and then where was that leading you to in your thinking at the time? I studied a commerce degree in part because
I got the score to get in, and doing a commerce degree seemed like a pretty safe degree to do, and it gave me a lot of choice and in terms of different things I could do later on. I wasn't really clear as to what I did want to do, but I ended up majoring in accounting and finance, which weren't areas that I'd ever wanted to go into professionally, but just seemed like good skill sets to have.
Yep. Yeah, and that was that family influence with the father's background again, do you think, or not really?
I don't. I think, look, probably in part it could have been.
Yep.
But I think definitely. I think it was also just gave me a broad enough skill set to kind of go off into the world and while still figuring out what I wanted to do.
Yeah, as you say, great foundational skills that apply to everything you do. So, okay, brilliant. So, finish uni. What was the thinking? Where were you going to invest your time, energy, and money at that point?
So, when I finished uni, I took a bit of time off. I travelled with an ex-girlfriend for 3 months around Southeast Asia, and that was great. That was just good little reset. Brilliant. To go and celebrate the degree and also get a bit of life experience and travel. Right. And so did that, came back, and I had a good friend from uni who I wanted to go, got together with, and we talked about starting a business together. Okay. And we sat there for a few weeks brainstorming different ideas and came up with big long lists of different business ideas, opportunities we could go and try and build something around. Awesome. And Bushy, I hate to say it, but the best of our ideas was to come up with a new type of reusable coffee cup, which I don't know if you've ever seen the Keep cup that people use nowadays to go and get their takeaway coffee in a reusable cup. Except our little innovation on that was we wanted to create a Keep cup type cup with a scent-infused pod on the lid of the cup that would release an aroma that would complement the sensory experience of drinking your coffee. So you'd drink a coffee and it would release a cinnamon or a chocolate or a coffee aroma. And so we had this harebrained scheme to go out and build this cup. And looking back on it, it was a really terrible idea. But
I like the thinking, though. I like the creative thinking.
It led me to then meet my now business partner, Glenn Carlson, at an event where I went along to kind of learn about entrepreneurship and business. And I caught up with him the next day for a coffee, and he convinced me that I'd be better off coming in and learning about business with him for a little while. And so we started working together, and then away we went. And very quickly I realized that this was a better environment to be in than trying to put together this crazy cup idea we had.
But I'd have to give full marks for the thinking behind the cup. Maybe not. It might have had some challenges, but how old were you at that stage, mate? You would have been what?
I was 22 at that time.
What did Glenn see in you think, at that stage to want to bring you on board? Because it was fairly early days in the KPI Dent fraternity, I would have thought.
Yeah, so Glenn was just launching the brand and the concept here in Australia, and we'd sort of tested it and trialled it in the UK for a few months, and then he brought it over here. And at the time, look, mate, I think it was one of those things where I was writing a blog about entrepreneurship and business, my thoughts on business, and he read that before we caught up for a meeting.
Gotcha.
And I felt I punched above my weight for a kid my age, and just I think when we met, just had the enthusiasm that a ambitious 22-year-old has, where they want to go and take on the world and build an empire and do all these kind of things. And clearly could see I had no idea what I was doing and no idea what I was talking about, but
massive energy and massive dedication.
Had enough enthusiasm and sparkle in my eye to see there was the kind of the raw material there for someone to go on to be great. And look, not in any way to say that I've got any kind of skills or talent beyond the average ambitious entrepreneur, but for whatever reason at that age, he and others would say that there was something in me that was destined to, go out and do good things and great things. And, I still feel inferior and insecure
Really?
when I consider my own value. And I think, that's probably a human thing to feel. But, throughout my life at different points, people have pointed to, some kind of a work ethic or an ambition or a drive or whatever it may be that is a little bit out of the ordinary. And and so I think you just noticed that, and we both saw a good opportunity.
Well, I think you're way too humble, Mike, and I think you undersell yourself in spades, because I think anyone who's met you straight away, there's something about you that you go, I really like this guy, and there's something about you that is quite engaging. And I think what I'm hearing is, and I'm no psychologist, but your biggest challenge is with yourself, mate, because I think you're way undervaluing your contribution and your capability, because I can see firsthand, and for those who don't know Glenn Carlson, I've spent a fair bit of time with Glenn. He's one of the most laser-focused, insightful people that I've come across in terms of being able to cut through the bullshit and get right down to what's important. And for him to see your potential and then mould that and give you the free rein to grow that potential. And if you're now suggesting that, from what I'm hearing, that not only have you building Brisbane for the organisation, but the opportunity to go to expand the coverage over in Canada via Vancouver, then that's got to be evident to everyone, probably apart from yourself, that you're going to make a massive contribution, mate. So
well, thank you. I sit with a group of very experienced entrepreneurs once a month in a thing called EO, Entrepreneurs Organisation, and one of the consistent themes that comes up in my own world is my own blind spots around self-belief and self-doubt and all those kind of things. And, I think we've all got our own crosses to bear, and I think in part those things drive me.
Yes.
In part
exactly.
they're the fuel to the fire of always wanting to be better and to prove something. And that has its own challenges as well, so it's about finding the balance between enough belief and but not also resting on your laurels, to not want to be hungry and thirsty for new growth and new horizons.
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, this sounds wanky, but I had a very similar path, and that all-consuming ethic to want to be better, best. It's certainly something that drove me for a long time, and just because I wanted to demonstrate, to myself as much as anything, that I was capable of making a mark, and that is a massive motivation. It does drive you, and I can sense that you're more driven than most people I come across. The challenge with all of that is you're starting to allude to, I think, is that balance, because you do make sacrifices. You put a lot of energy into building the opportunity. You're putting a lot of energy into the wealth creation road, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And it can start to get very lonely and feel very imbalanced when you're sort of in the cut and thrust of it. You're crossing the desert. But I think the toughest thing in our world these days is the patience and persistence muscle to see it through. You've got the discipline, you've got the drive, but it's at the moment you're not seeing the fruits of your labour, and it feels like you're putting in an enormous amount without getting a lot back at this point in time. I think if you're able to stick the course, but also put some balance back in, and it's easy for me to say this 30 years on, having been on a very similar journey to you, to sit back and say that now. But the biggest transition, and the easiest way I can describe this, is to move from being a sprinter to a marathon runner. And because early on we just want to sprint, we want to run hard, run early to make a mark. but we can get puffed out and we can burn ourselves out if we're not careful. It's the way that we can then just take the edge off a little bit because our expectations are way higher than 99% of other people's, and then start to enjoy the journey a little bit more and embrace time as our friend, not our foe. I think we live in an age where time is seen as the enemy, so everything's got to be fast, it's got to be young, it's got to be quick. If we accept that anything worthwhile is going to take time, and success in anything takes time, just like in nature, you grow a seed today and in 20 years' time you've got a tree and some fruit, but in between times you don't see much at all. You're weeding the garden, you're taking it through the drought, and you're trying to look after it during the floods. If we're able to embrace that as part of the journey and then take that pressure off and then actually enjoy the road from a mindset perspective, I think we're all going to be better prepared to then actually get the fruits that we're all aspiring to get. So
it's a good metaphor.
Yeah, but as I say, easy for me to say that, mate. But now, sort of circling around a little bit. So, because obviously I've got a massive interest in property, and I know that you've invested in property. So I'm sort of keen to explore that journey a little bit in terms of where you've come from and where you're at now. So you bought your first property at 19. You lived in that in Melbourne. Can you sort of take us through the rest of the journey, and what was your thinking at the time? Was it a property you were going to hold on to, or was it just one to buy while you're living and then sell? And talk us through both the thinking and the property investment journey from there on through, if you can.
Yeah. So at 19, I bought this, and I was fortunate enough, had the money there. I'm like, right, what do I do with it? Get an apartment. That seemed like a smart thing to do. So did that. Had no idea about property or investing or anything like that, really nothing. And so I ended up buying in 2007. Which, for those history buffs amongst us, wasn't a great time to jump into the property market right at the height of pre-GFC. But anyway, bought that apartment. GFC happened not long after, and so it just sort of it plateaued for I guess a little bit, and hasn't necessarily been a great performer. Yep. But what it did do was obviously get me on the ladder, and so in between that time after buying that property, I've invested in a bit of sort of public equities and invested in our company Dent. To buy into that, and so I went through a funny phase for many years with that one apartment where I really sat on it for, I'd say, a good 6 or 7 years, and just sort of didn't really think much more about further investing in property. And part of the reason why I didn't was because at the time my thinking was I should invest into areas where I've got expertise, or I've got passion, or I've got enthusiasm, or any of these kind of things. And I just had zero expertise in property. And at the time, I didn't really have a lot of enthusiasm in property either. I wasn't running around looking at domain or realestate.com.au or anything like that, or going around to open inspections. And I wasn't that guy. I wasn't really interested in property. I was more interested in business. In terms of putting my energy and my time into developing something that was like it was all just going into the business. I was really excited by that. But then at one point I actually read a book which shifted my thinking. And
which book?
And that book talked about essentially the benefits of leverage available through property. And it suddenly occurred to me that if I had $100,000, let's say, of money to invest in anything, I could invest that in the share market. And, let's say if the market grew by 10% over the year, I'd walk away with 110 grand. And then that would compound each year, that it would continue to grow, and et cetera, et cetera. But then I thought, well, if I could take that same 100 grand and I could then borrow to buy a real asset, being property, and turn that 100 grand capital base into a $500,000 capital base through 5xing the available asset.
Yep.
Then if that property of 500 grand grew by 5% over the course of a year, I'd make 25 grand instead of 10 grand. And so all of a sudden I'm like, hang on, the property market could perform half as well. And assuming the property based on current interest rates was fairly neutrally geared, and the capital appreciation grew by half the rate that the equity market did, then I'd at least double my return. And that's assuming that it does half as well, right? And statistically, property and equities over the long term perform in a fairly similar way.
Very similar.
And so I'm like, right. And this was like a real light bulb moment. I'm like, right, okay. Now I need to work out how do I access as much debt as possible and redeploy that into fairly safe blue chip asset class, property. And so that became kind of my MO. At that point, I must have been about 26, 27, and like had that insight.
Yep. Brilliant.
And so then I had a bit of equity that had built up in the Chapel Street property at that point.
Of course.
And so I then took that equity and immediately bought two other investment properties in Melbourne. And at that point in time, all of a sudden, my enthusiasm for property went from like pretty low to the floor to like 10 out of 10 because I saw the link between wealth accumulation coming back to values.
Yes.
All of a sudden, I'm like, wow, okay, now I can see why property can be this amazing wealth accumulation vehicle. And all of a sudden, I'm like really excited by property. I'm like, I can't get enough property. And it's that fascinates me now that I reflect on it. So it's not the property so much. It's it's how that's a box for money, a box for wealth accumulation that got me really juiced.
Yeah,
rightly or wrongly, that's just how my values are lined up right now.
Yeah, well,
and again, it's like, what would I do with the money with all this wealth accumulation? I'm not sure yet. That's the kind of the next phase of my life is figuring out, how do I redeploy that wealth I've accumulated into other areas that I value and that contribute and give back and all these kind of things. For me, it's not about jets or boats or any of that sort of stuff. I couldn't give a stuff about any of that. No. And so that's when I got those. And I ended up getting at that point, starting to accumulate a bit of a property investment team of people like a great mortgage broker and a buyer's agent who could help me actually pick the property.
Right.
And for paying a buyer's agent 15 or 20 grand, but to get something that where they go and negotiate at auction to purchase the property, typically will save me at least that in terms of just the negotiation on buying it. But also they've got a full criteria as to what's an investment grade property and what's likely to lead to the greatest amount of accumulation over time, capital growth. And they know the market, they're in it day to day. It's like it was just a no-brainer for me to spend that money on that kind of advisor. So I started to build a bit of this team of a mortgage broker, a buyer's agent, a legal firm, and start to really bring together that property investment team. And then I also, in between that time, ended up doing a renovation on Chapel Street and got a builder on site who can help me go through those renovations. So I think it's really important from an investment perspective, how you build the team around you. Because from my end, because my time goes into business, and for me, the bucket that gets most of my time is business, I can't give the time to property. So therefore, I need a great team around me to run that strategy.
Yeah, brilliant conclusion. Again, what I find having dealt with 1,700 odd investors over our journey to date is that most of them don't trust anyone, so they try and reinvent the wheel and give themselves a second job trying to do it part-time after hours, and then don't do it very well anyway because they just it's you don't know what you don't know, and there is a lot to know. It's as you well pointed out, property investment is really just house in the shape of a money box, and it's actually about the strategy, the structure, and the financing that's going to make a massive difference to the end result. But the property at the end of the day is at the end of that process, and having the smarts to assemble a team around you, very key, because the simple analogy, if you're going to play an elite sport, you don't rock up by yourself to play against the best rugby team or the best AFL football team in the ground on your own. You've got to have a team of people around you that are the best in each position, that are all combining together to play your game, and you're actually sitting in the stand as the owner of the team, not the player at all. Once you recognise the value of that, which is then allowing you to put your expertise into what you're good at, which is building your career and building your business with Dent, then you've got two things happening in parallel that are going to complement each other long term. So, Brent, I really admire the insights that you've been able to come up with pretty early on the journey, Mike. So, and just tell me that the book that you read that sort of got your fire burning on property. Can you share with us what that was?
I think it was called The Investment Property Plan, and it was written by one of our clients, Stephen Zamical, who runs a mortgage broking firm in Melbourne.
Gotcha.
And he sort of got me onto that journey, I suppose. And I'm very grateful for that kind of little spark of education in the beginning that got me on that journey. And since then I've read a lot more and worked with other advisors, but that was the name of the book in the beginning. Yeah,
brilliant. That's awesome. So moving forward then through your journey, what's changed? What else have you added to it, and where you're at now on the property front?
So look, at that point, my entire strategy was around, how do I access as much debt to be able to redeploy into, which is, I don't know, I think for a lot of people is a very counterintuitive thinking. It's like, a lot of people, especially, I don't know, my parents' generation and grandparents and I think have a very different attitude towards debt.
Yes.
I'm young and bullish and naive at this point in time too. So I could become undone later on. But at least at this point, my thinking is I don't see, at least based on the economy, the structural things that are going on in the Australian economy right now, I don't see interest rates rising to any great extent over the next 5 to 10 years. So I feel like there's enough margins of safety that, being fairly well leveraged over the next 5 to 10 years is not going to lead to a huge amount of risk of blowing up. But I guess that's always the risk. You want to avoid getting blown up.
Sure.
And so I went on that path to basically, work out based on my serviceability, what capacity I had to service debt, according to the banks, how much could I get to go out and buy more investment properties. So those three I got initially were relatively, they were sort of negatively geared a little bit. So there was some cash burn there each year. And then I went and bought three other small townhouse type houses in Queensland, which were slightly more positively geared. And my rationale for that was, at the time when I bought them, I saw that that particular area that I bought them, there was a lot of infrastructure growth there.
Right.
And this is based on another advisor that I used to buy those.
Good.
And where Queensland was in the property cycle, that it was due for a bit of an upshot in the next sort of 10 to 15 years.
Good.
And so I put the money there. Now, my big apprehension with investing where I have is that right now it's not really growing. And where the Melbourne properties are, growing steadily each year, and I can kind of see the result and the effect of the investment. The Queensland ones, I'm really having to psychologically manage the challenge of, is this a good investment or not? Because some of the real upshot of that growth, every property cycle, most of the gains happen in the last 20% of the cycle type thing. And so you're spending 80% of the time just sitting there, not really achieving a lot. But if you're in there for the last bit of the game, then that's where most of the returns happen. And so it's just about riding that through.
Well,
and so that brought me to essentially maxing my borrowing capacity, and based on my income and borrowing capacity, I'm fairly impressed with how well we stretched it out. And so at this point in time, that's where things are at. My next kind of horizon around property is I am very interested in things like subdivision, sort of some small time developments to dip my toe on the water to have that experience, and then potentially look at some more kind of residential type developments as time goes on. And I just see that subdivision strategy as being a way to lead to instant uplift just by dividing the block of land and putting a couple of little apartments or houses on there, at least in the beginning.
It's a very good call, and I think the invisible benefit of going down the build road, having gone on a similar journey to you, Mike, started off with the existing stuff, and as I accumulated knowledge, expertise, and surrounded myself with the right people, I started to see the real benefits of building. And one of the major benefits of building that most people don't see is that from a holding cost perspective, and therefore the affordability piece, and it's the affordability piece that generally makes or breaks successful property investors, because, as you've well said, you're currently in the wilderness in terms of the position in the property cycle at the moment, particularly in Brisbane. But if you look historically at what happens in property, and it's at best you'll see a cycle go from woe to go in 8 years, but more often it's around 15 years. So while we've seen meteoric rises in property values in Sydney, for example, there's been a recent study of price growth over the last 15 years, and guess what? Sydney is actually the worst performing capital growth market in the country. And while it's had meteoric growth over the last 3 or 4 years, if you look at over that 15-year horizon, its growth has actually been less than every other mainland capital state.
Really?
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
So Sydney's just gone through catch-up, and Brisbane is bubbling along in the middle of a pack. And what excites me about Brisbane at the moment is that while Sydney and Melbourne are both rocketed along, and Melbourne's about to come off the boil as well, by the way. It's already starting to show the signs in certain locations. We haven't seen the spike occur in Brisbane. So I'm very bullish about Brisbane, and in fact doing something there ourselves and encouraging a number of our investors to be putting their money into new builds in Brisbane for the very reason that I think we're not too far away from seeing that spike in growth. So if you're able to last the distance, and it's the affordability piece that I keep coming back to that a lot of people don't put enough energy into. And if we structure it the right way and it's set up in a fashion that means that from an ongoing holding cost perspective, it's not having a major impact on your lifestyle, then you're able to sit back without worrying about it too much. So, and that's really the difference between someone who gets to the finish line and someone who doesn't. It's just making sure that it's structured and tweaked in the right way to make sure from a cash flow perspective it's easy to hang on to.
Yeah, I think that's really key, because the greatest anxiety I have around my property investment strategy is while it's not massive, but it's enough of a cash burn that cuts into my cash reserves each year.
Of course.
That just like psychologically, it's really tough to and challenging to manage that, because while the net appreciation of the portfolio is growing, significantly more than the cash burn, and that's for, I suppose, the strategy I'm working is that, whatever, if I burn, 20 or 30 grand in the year in terms of cash flow, let's say, to be able to have the portfolio, but the whole portfolio appreciates on average by 200 grand in the year, then it's worthwhile. But it's just seeing that cash reserve dwindle, and staying focused on the property value only gets valued once a year or whatever it may be.
Yes.
So, while daily you can see your cash reserves declining, you don't actually tangibly feel and touch and see the growth of the property on a regular basis too. And so it's as you say, really important, I think, to have the structure to optimize and minimize that cash burn, but also have the psychological fortitude to be able to manage your own psychology, I think, in investing. And this is true in public markets as well, of course. When you're in the market and it starts to drop and decline, everyone is fearful and sells, and which Buffett would say a great time to buy.
Yes.
And when everyone's optimistic and greedy, and when things are going up, they're optimistic and they're greedy. Great time to get out. And so it's just about kind of managing, I think, the emotional side of investing. And from my perspective, the way I try and do that is set up the system in a way where, I'm not regularly logging in to check in on things, or, I have an accounting firm, a bookkeeping firm in India that does a lot of the reconciliations of transactions. I've got everything in Xero, an accounting software where I run it all out of. And so, I see bits and pieces, I answer questions for them here and there, all that kind of thing, but I try and avoid, reviewing regularly, and maybe only review sort of once every 6 or 12 months, just to work out what I do next.
Again, very smart, Mike. And I'd sort of jumping in there, in my recently published book, The Freedom Formula, I talk about a preventative wealth program rather than preventative health. You're probably familiar with preventative health, where rather than take an aspirin for a headache, you're taking multivitamin supplements over a period of time to improve your health and lifestyle. No different in the wealth arena. So the preventative wealth exercise is about taking the right vitamins, and the mindset piece is a core element of that. The affordability piece is also a core element of that, which a lot of people don't spend anywhere near enough time getting their head around either of those. But it always interests me to see people who, they'll say, well, I'm investing for the next 10, 12, 15, 20 years, and yet they'll make decisions on almost a monthly basis based on what's happening in the press. So I often say to people, do your homework, structure it well, do your due diligence before you start. But once you start, get out of the road and let it do its thing. Because if you start interfering with the strategy that you've created, that's where you're going to shortchange yourself and get yourself into trouble. So again, if there's enough contingency built into the system, so that even in downturns, or when you've got properties that aren't collecting a rent, or they're damaged, or something is happening on the employment front, if you've got a rainy day reserve of funds, or war chest as we call it, that you can fall back on, then you're never going to be in a position where you have to make rash and short-term decisions that could then hamstring your ongoing situation. So very interesting, mate. You're a very sophisticated investor. There's very few people that I get to talk to who've gone through the length of thinking that you have. So I, again, pay kudos to your ability to sit back and think about it. And I guess that leads me to my next subject, which I'm very keen to have a chat with you about, because you and I have talked about this on a couple of occasions, and you wrote an awesome blog recently on dichotomy, and this sort of polarity that you're trying to tussle between the cut and thrust of making a dent in the world and its all-consuming power at one end, and at the other end, your desire to want to get away from the hustle and bustle and enjoy some serenity, tranquility, be at one with nature and avoid the stress. So, and it's a balance a lot of us go through. Can you talk to us a bit about that? Because I find that a very interesting topic for discussion. Mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think Bushy, all throughout, I said this in the article, that all throughout my life, I feel like I've existed at the intersection of these two, what feels like these two opposing worlds, these opposing forces in my psychology. Part of me is very ambitious and driven and wants to go out and make a mark and leave a legacy and build an empire and do all these kind of things. You're hungry and thirsty to run hard at life and achieve great things. But then the other half of me desperately craves the simple life, cabin in the woods, cut off from society and commerce and just living in nature and, living off the land type of a thing, right? And too much of one, and I get bored and, don't feel like I'm fulfilled or have purpose and those kind of things. Too much of the other, I get burnt out and frayed at the edges. And perhaps it's my nature and my personality is to have the pendulum swing between each of them too violently that I can't find the balance in between. But I feel like a lot of people do struggle with finding that balance. You end up on a path where professionally or career wise, you're in it, you're in the thick of you're in the fray of your career and it's, I think our professional lives are incredibly demanding nowadays. Totally. In many years ago where, some might say that, someone who was working the land for 12 or 14 or 16 hours a day, that was very physically demanding. And while that is, of course, true, I think the lives that we live nowadays is very psychologically demanding. We're always on. There's always information flowing. There's, the email never shuts down. The world never shuts down. And so if you aren't careful, you can get sucked into this this kind of dimension of your professional world, which is just so demanding that you sometimes don't feel like you can escape. And I think the chemicals that are released when you get stuck into that world where you're always on, it can be hard to let go of. It's like if I'm away from my phone, or if we're away from our phones or computers for long enough, we have physical withdrawal symptoms because we have this the dopamine that's released every time the thing goes off or the message comes in, and whatever it may be, it's trained us to become addicted to it.
Right.
And I feel very addicted to work, and my big challenge is to be able to step outside of that and have the balance of the simpler life, which I really desperately crave. And so I'm on this journey at the moment, this quest, if you like, to figure out how to navigate some of these life dichotomies, whether it be the professional ones or even relationships and family and kids and all these kind of decisions, which I think particularly for someone who's at my stage of life, these decisions can feel like big, challenging decisions to make. I don't know whether it's just me or if it's, the sign of the times that we're in, but, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago, I feel like life was a lot simpler in many ways. It's like you go out, you earn a crust and you meet someone, you settle down, you have kids and, live happily ever after type of a thing. And yet we live in this world today where there's this infinite abundance and infinite choice. And the world, I think, presents this facade or this fantasy that we can have it all. You can lead the high octane life and live the simple life at the same time, and you can, lead a really adventurous life of travel and be free spirited and be settled and have the family and all these kind of things as well. And I just don't see it. I just believe that there are these dichotomies where there's a decision, a fork in the road, and you've kind of got to make a choice and go down one particular path. And sometimes when you choose a path, it can be very hard to reverse out of that, whether that be, in a kid scenario or a family setting or a business setting. I feel like, especially in business, that once you're in it, and especially if you're in the business of building a bit of an empire and you're trying to build something for growth and scale and all those kind of things, once you're on that journey, it's very difficult to reverse out of it. And so the dichotomy for me is, what's the best way to make these choices in life? And so part of my podcast that I want to launch in the not too distant future and the book I'm writing is about having conversations with people around, how they've thought about and navigated those decisions in their life.
Brilliant, and I think it's the disease of our age. actually, Mike, because we are inundated with images of everything. So you hit it on the head. There's limitless offerings now. In the old days, there was no choice, but it's limitless now. So the biggest challenge most of us has is what to say no to and when to say no, and but remain focused. And what I hear in your language is if I choose this path, then I have to sacrifice that path. And I guess I probably don't totally ascribe to that view, and the reason I say that, Mike, is I'm very like you. I'm a country boy, so and that's why they call me Bushy. I'm a boy from the bush, and grew up on the land, loved it. The freedom as a child was just awesome, but I also love the cut and thrust of business. And Sonia and I have been fortunate enough, I feel, to actually combine both. So I think I mentioned this to you before. We live in a 55-acre property on a beautiful homestead, looking down the valley. We're surrounded by our Samoyed dogs. It's a bit like Noah's Ark. We've got pretty much one or two of everything on the farm. We've got a caretaker on the farm who lives there rent-free to look after the animals so that we can focus on the business. We've got a studio office separate from the home, but walking across the courtyard, we look through full glass windows down the valley. We do our business there, and our clients come to see us there. So I do feel like we've managed to bring together the fast world with the natural world in a way that really works for us. So I can start the day extremely chilled. We've got a ritual that we go through that's smile time with the dogs and meditation and gratitude. And I go to the gym and I play the piano for half an hour before I even think about starting work. And then because technology is such a fantastic enabler, and the ability to connect with anyone anywhere now, and the ability to do business with anyone anywhere now through those means, I actually think it's easier to achieve what you were talking about than it ever has been. So it's sort of interesting, but I think the difference probably between you and I is that I'm a different stage of that cycle. And you are right in the wilderness. I've said this a couple of times, I guess, but you're right in the heart and the cut and thrust of it all. And at the moment, you can't see the wood for the trees. The property thing, all you're seeing the property thing at the moment is it's actually pulling money out of your pocket. It's going to get to a point when it swings where all of a sudden it's going to start giving you equity, which when it's transformed will give you cash flow, which will give you time. And once you've got time, then you can choose when and who and how you want to work. So it's just lasting that distance to get through that what feels like a pretty steep mountain at the moment. Once you get to the summit, then your life is going to change dramatically. I just encourage you to stay the course.
And this is what I'm so excited about discovering. I think, Bushy, as well, is that the idealistic part of me and I suppose also the pragmatic part of me believes that is true. That balance is possible, and so I'm very excited to talk to wise souls like yourself to learn about how they approach it and how they do it. So thanks for sharing that story.
Yeah, no, I just think it is the illness of our age. What you're talking about, this desire to have everything, but it feels like at what cost? And I think coming back to something that I've picked up with yourself is you're very good at looking at what's important to you from a value perspective, and you've been able to identify that very clearly. If you remain focused on those values, and then you surround yourself, whether it be by career and everything else, with things that reinforce that, and then you make it absolutely crystal clear in terms of your business career that what the end game is, and that everything you're doing needs to head towards that rather than play second fiddle to someone else's vision, then if that's accepted, then you will end up where you want to be. I have no doubt about that whatsoever, mate. But success does take time. It's a 15 to 20 year journey. I've done countless research on this in every sphere and reading beyond belief, everything I can read around this subject. And I just keep coming back to the same outcome, that success takes 15 to 20 years. And for those that are able to stay the course, they enjoy all the fruits. For those who jump ship, or don't have the patience and can't push with the persistence, then they get shipwrecked and go off chasing something else that never quite gets there. So you mentioned Warren Buffett a minute ago, and I think another one of his great sayings is that wealth is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. I don't think there's any better description there. And Warren Buffett himself has made all of his wealth after 55.
Yeah.
So he's now in his 80s, but most of that wealth has come in the last 10 years. So
yeah. And look, I think the exciting thing about what you've pointed to as well, Bush, is that when I zoom out and look at the long-term perspective, for me, in my case, very fortunate, I've got time on my hands. So I've got another 50 years of productive life ahead of me. And so, I think also another unacknowledged secret of wealth is that if you put a few little seeds in the ground and a few things in place and just let time do the rest, then there is no doubt that you will accumulate wealth. You will set yourself free. You'll do all these kind of things. I think, as you've said, it's just the challenge of riding the journey and staying the course. But if you say it takes 20 years to achieve success or any kind of significant wealth accumulation, then if you've got 40 years up your sleeve or even 60 years up your sleeve, and you may be listening to this, and I think we're all going to live a lot longer than we expect as well, that time will take care of the rest.
I totally agree. Couldn't have said it better, mate. You're absolutely spot on there. Now, look, when can we look forward to seeing the release of Dichotomy, the podcast, and the book, Mike? Is it far away?
Mate, it's probably the podcast I'll release the middle of this year, so June, July 2018, and the book is going to be a compilation of stories and insights from the guests that I've interviewed on there. So that's probably an early 2019 release, but late 2018. But 2018 will be the year where hopefully that starts to put a splash on the map. Yeah,
fantastic, mate. Love your passion. If reflecting for a minute then, so if you were talking to your 18 or 19-year-old self, with a view of letting yourself know what you think you should have invested your time, energy, and money in at that point, would it be any different?
I'd say two things to my 18-year-old self. Number one, relax.
Yes.
Just enjoy life and the people around you a little bit more. Loosen your grip on life. The nature of a very ambitious, driven person is or at least I won't project my nature, is to take things pretty seriously. And I think if I could give myself advice, it would be to just invest more in the relationships, the people, the fun, the kind of the things that don't have anything to do with money, and have everything to do with leading a really rich life of great experiences and great connection and love and intimacy and all those kind of things. Because when you have those things, and when business and wealth suddenly can take those things away, then you see and realize just how precious some of those non-financial things are in life. Yes. And so I'd encourage myself to take better care of the things that didn't have anything to do with wealth.
Very wise words there, mate. And what sprung to mind immediately when you started talking about that was what you've shared with me before in relation to Burning Man, which I'm really looking forward to joining you with later this year. And do you want to share a little bit of the Burning Man exercise for those that don't know much about it and what you got out of it? Because I'm really excited about it.
So last year I went to a thing called Burning Man, which if you're not familiar with it, every year and for the last 20 odd years, about 70,000 people descend on the Nevada desert and spend a week at a festival of arts, of creativity, of music, and it's a very unique thing. It's very hard to describe. It would be impossible for me to properly encapsulate just how remarkable the experience of Burning Man is. And it really is for the free-spirited type of person. If you're open to exploring, exploring yourself and people, and then it's a wonderful experience. And so for a week, people set up camp at Burning Man, and there's incredible DJs and music and all sorts of weird and wonderful things, art cars that are driving around the desert with parties that are happening on them, and different activities that are going on all throughout the whole city.
Yep.
That's set up, and it's a temporary city, so everyone sets up, and then one of the principles that governs Burning Man is leave no trace. So everything is stripped down, removed, and every ounce of material built environment is taken out of there to leave the natural state of the desert in its natural state. And the beauty of Burning Man is that there are 10 principles that govern how people behave and operate there. And outside of those 10 principles, you're essentially free to go and express yourself and do whatever it is that you want to do to feel like you're alive and to experience what it means to be human and to experience other people. And so some of those principles are things like radical self-expression, self-reliance, decommodification, meaning nothing to do with selling. So you can't buy anything at Burning Man. Everything's free. Nothing is paid for.
Awesome.
And all one of the other principles is gifting. And so things get gifted between participants for different things that you need. So you come in with some supplies and then things get shared around and gifted. And just by being in that environment for a week, there's no technology, there's no reception, you're completely unplugged. I was there and I wouldn't have known if there was World War III happening in the world, and at the time with Trump and North Korea, I wouldn't have been surprised if there was.
Yes.
And yet completely present in the moment with the people that are there. And when human beings are put into an environment where there's no judgment, they're completely free to express themselves in whatever way feels natural and beautiful for them, and they're kind and caring towards one another. You just really experience and realize that as human beings, all we are at the core of who we are is just a channel for love and for gratitude and for connection, and taking away all the trappings of commerce and business and all these kind of things, and just being with other humans and being human. It was a truly, remarkable experience, and so I'd really encourage anyone to go along and check it out. It's not for the faint-hearted. Do your research before you go to make sure you're prepared. But I think for people of all walks of life, of all ages, there are people there. In our camp we had 4 generations.
Wow.
We had the great grandkids, the grandkids, the kids, and the grandparents, all in one RV together there at Burning Man. Right the way through to, a lot of 20, 30, 40 something year olds, partying and enjoying themselves. But, whatever your flavor of experience you'd like to have there, everything's on offer.
Unbelievable, mate. I just, the whole concept of, being in a place and a time without judgment I think judgment is what causes the most grief around the world in all its forms, and it's quite insidious the way it pervades human interaction. To actually spend time without judgment in a place of it must have been quite euphoric. I can't wait. Actually, I just think it's going to be a once in a lifetime experience.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Fantastic, mate. Well, look, I always like talking to you, Mike. I could talk to you for hours. And looking forward to catching up with you again soon. It's been really generous of you to share your time and your journey so far with us. I know you're going on to bigger and better things. You don't believe it yet, but I do. And I'll be right there behind you to make sure that you stay the course. So if people want to contact you, though, Mike, what's the best way to do that?
So best way is just to head to my website, which would be MikeJamesReid.com. And, shoot me an email or, you can read some of my stuff on my blog there.
Fantastic, mate. Any final things you'd like to leave with us, or anything you haven't said that you'd like to share?
All I would share is really understand. Investment is all about, for me, understanding yourself and understanding your own values and what you do value in life, and then setting up your wealth accumulation infrastructure to be able to support those values. And so the journey of wealth accumulation, I believe, needs to begin with a journey of self-discovery and self-understanding. And the better you understand yourself, the better you can design the right vehicle of wealth accumulation to get you to where you want to go.
That's very wise words, mate. I'm astounded at your insights. Very few people have that level of ability to step back and look at themselves, appreciate that, and then look at what they can really do to make it happen long term. So, full marks, mate, and thanks again. We'll look forward to talking to you again, mate. I feel like we've only scratched the surface today, so if you're up for it, I would certainly like to get you back to drill into more subjects, and we might even get together and share the Burning Man experience on Get Invested as a prize for those who can see the benefits of it, mate. So
would love to. If we can get a crew of investors along to Burning Man, that would be a great experience.
It would be sensational. Thanks, Mike. We'll look forward to talking to you soon, mate.
Cool, mate. Thanks, Bushy. See you later.
How good was that? I hope you enjoyed it. To get a summary of all the investment gold and to get a copy of the show notes, email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's hello@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.khgroup.com.au/Get Invested. And join me next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. Thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you'll live forever and live as if you'll die tomorrow.